Huh. Oh, hello, Mr. Fritz here. In this video, we're going to talk about vectors in 3D space. And we're going to draw them, we're going to do some operations with them, and really it's not too much different than what we already know how to do in 2D. So let's dive right in. First off, let's just talk about the concept of a three-dimensional vector. What we've graphed so far have been two-dimensional vectors with an x component and a y component. You can see that this green vector here is the x component and the y component. This is like the resultant of those two. And you might have noticed there's like a little z hanging out in there. And really, if we kind of rotate this image, now I can kind of visualize a three-dimensional idea of this two-dimensional vector. This really has no z component. It's not coming in or out of the screen or the page at all. But we can still consider it having three dimensions, an x, a y, and a z. So one thing that's a little bit different about how we draw three dimensions is we're used to drawing x going horizontally left and right and y going vertically left and right. But by convention, when we draw our x, y, z set of axes, it's traditionally like this, where the x is lying where it comes out and into the paper, and then y is still kind of now is moving horizontally, and z is the up and down or the vertical axis. So a little bit different, but we'll get used to it. And then sometimes what you'll notice happening quite a bit is usually we get this kind of like dotted line that kind of shows that it's going into the page. It's kind of hard to draw three-dimensional things in two-dimensional space, but we do the best that we can. So if I were to now add a z component to this vector, what you can kind of see is this green vector that's leaping out of this page, it's coming towards you, is this three-dimensional vector made up of an x, a y, and a z component. And you can kind of see that the way this is pictured is in this gray resultant. That is our two-dimensional vector made up of just x and y. And if you were to raise this thing up some z units, that's how you get that three-dimensional vector. We can write this vector as x, y, z, just as we normally do, but now with three components rather than two. Let's talk about drawing these three-dimensional vectors. So this is something I want you to try drawing along with me here. I'm going to make just a new blank page, and I'm going to set up a set of axes. So let's do something like this. We have our y, we have our z, and then our x is the one that kind of comes out of the page, and then I'm actually going to switch over to a dashed or dotted line. That kind of goes into the page. So we call this, this is our x axis, this is our y axis, and this is our z. Oops, let's try that again. That's our z axis. And so drawing vectors, really you think of drawing a cube. As long as if you've ever drawn a cube before where you just draw a square and then you kind of bring back these sides and then you kind of connect. If you've ever drawn anything like that before, then you're in good shape. That's basically the same thing. And then sometimes if you're really fancy, you like to draw the kind of inner faces as well. That's basically what we're doing here. We're going to be drawing a series of parallel sides and squares that kind of makes a cube to help us kind of visualize the three-dimensional aspect of this. So let's graph this vector. Let's draw 2, -3, 4. And again, remember this is our x, our y, our z. So let's start off by kind of charting some tick marks on these set of axes. And I'm just going to do this in another color so it stands out. So my x, I'm going to come out of the page 2. So I'm going to try and keep this as evenly spaced as possible. So there's 1 unit and 2 units. In the y direction, I'm going in the negative direction. 1, 2, 3. And in the z direction, I'm going up 4. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I'm going to do to draw this is I'm basically going to be drawing this cube kind of right in this space right here. And this vector, if you can kind of see, is going to be coming out of this page and moving up as well. So let's see if we can't draw it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of link the first couple of components together, and then I'm going to link the second components together, and then start to kind of build this cube. So I'm going to go back over to my line tool, and I'm going to make this thing green, and let's start drawing these these squares or rectangles or parallelograms of this cube. So let's start off with this 2, -3. I'm going to come out in the x direction, a +2, and I'm also going to go to the left in the y direction, -3. And so what I'm going to kind of do is I'm going to imagine that I walked out 2 in my x, and then I want to walk to the left 3 in that y direction. So when I'm walking left, I'm walking parallel to my y-axis. This part's kind of crucial. So it might look like that I'm overshooting this point right here, but remember I've kind of popped this thing out of the page. So now I want to meet, if I were to start with the y direction, then the x direction, I could think I'm walking in the y direction, and then I'm going to walk out of the page in this x direction. And you can kind of see this isn't perfect, but it's kind of like a little parallelogram. That's like the bottom of the cube that I'm building. Next, let's take a look at combining the -3 with the y and the 4 with the z. So that one's a little bit easier to do because that's kind of flat on this piece of paper. Z is up 4, and the y is out 3. And so what I'm basically doing is I'm kind of walking up z, and I'm walking over -3. Or I can think of it as walking to the left 3 and up 4. So that's kind of like the back side of my cube that I just created. So that takes care of those two. And then now at this point, we're kind of ready to start filling things in. And so there's different ways you can approach this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to build this cube by just drawing parallel lines. So if I want to draw this top portion of this cube, I want to be parallel to this bottom edge of the cube, or the cuboid, I should call it. And so I'm going to bring this thing out until I'm right over this vertex, or this corner of my cube. And that way I can drop a height of this thing. And so I'll do the same thing. I'm going to move over. I'm now in the front of my cube. I'm going to move over until I'm right above this vertex, or this corner of my cube. And, oops. So let's draw from here until I'm hovering right over to make this edge right here. And then finally I'm going to move parallel to this bottom edge until I meet my back corner. And so I've basically now built this cube where this dimension is 2, this dimension is 3, this dimension, this height is 4, and that this point, 2, -3, 4, is actually right about here. So this point, this coordinate is 2, -3, 4. And so now if I were to draw the vector from the origin to here, let's use a nifty arrow tool here, and let's make this, let's make it purple. It's going to start here at the origin, and it's going to come out to this coordinate right here. So, and if you want to get really fancy, you can now draw back over with my dotted lines to really put this thing inside the box. And now you can see it's kind of leaping off the page. Kind of a tricky thing to draw. But again, all we did is we drew all these parallel lines. And so feel free to look this over again if you need an extra look at this. But really all that we're doing is we're kind of taking these tick marks out and drawing a bunch of parallelograms. So that's drawing 3D vectors. Not an easy thing to do. So it might be worth just trying practicing some out, and seeing how it works.